The rain hammered against the front windows of El Refugio like impatient fists demanding entry. I wiped down the scarred wooden bar for the third time in 10 minutes, my hands moving in mechanical circles, while my mind drifted somewhere safer, somewhere far from this cramped neighborhood bar with its flickering neon sign and perpetual smell of stale beer and fried food. The scent of lime wedges mixed with the sharp tang of tequila as I restock the garnish station, my fingers moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent the last 8 months perfecting the art of becoming invisible. The bar's ambient noise wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. The low murmur of Tuesday night regulars nursing their drinks, the occasional clink of glasses, the muted television in the corner playing a soccer match. No one was really watching. My lower back ached with that particular throb that came from standing on linoleum floors for 6-hour shifts, but I welcomed the discomfort. Physical pain was easier to manage than the other kind, the kind that lived in shadows and unexpected sounds, and the constant vigilance that had become my second skin. "Reina, table 4 needs another round," called Marco from the kitchen pass-through, his weathered face appearing briefly in the window. "And don't forget, the owner wants those receipts organized before close." I nodded without looking up, already moving toward the beer taps. Marco had given me this job when I'd shown up 8 months ago with nothing but a backpack and desperation in my eyes. He'd asked few questions, paid me cash under the table, and never pushed when I flinched at sudden movements or refused to put my real name on anything official. El Refugio sat in a forgotten corner of the city where rent was cheap and questions were cheaper. The regulars were working-class men who came for the strong drinks and weak judgment, a handful of elderly women who treated the place like their living room, and the occasional lost soul who wandered in from the rain seeking temporary shelter from whatever storm they were running from. I understood that last category intimately. The door chimed as someone entered, bringing with it a gust of wind that scattered cocktail napkins across the bar. I glanced up reflexively, my body already tensing in that automatic assessment I'd learned to perform with every new arrival. Threat level, exit routes, potential weapons within reach. The man who entered moved with a quiet authority that immediately set him apart from our usual clientele. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than I'd made in the past 3 months combined. His dark hair was swept back in that effortlessly styled way that spoke of expensive barbers and careful maintenance. Even in the dim light of the bar, I could see the sharp angles of his face, the way his dark eyes swept the room with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating threats and opportunities in a single glance. He was handsome in a way that felt dangerous, like admiring a perfectly crafted blade before realizing it could cut you. 2 men flanked him, slightly behind, their stance casual, but their eyes alert. Security, I recognized immediately. Not the bouncer type, but something more professional, more deadly. The suited man approached the bar with measured steps, choosing a stool in the corner where he could observe both the entrance and the back hallway. Smart positioning. I noticed these things now. Had trained myself to read body language and spatial awareness the way my grandmother had once taught me to read recipe measurements and prayer rhythms. "What can I get you?" I asked, keeping my voice professionally neutral. My eyes lowered just enough to be respectful without seeming subservient. Another skill I'd perfected. The delicate balance of service industry and visibility. "Whiskey. Neat. Your best bottle." His voice was a low rumble, accent barely detectable, but present enough to suggest Italian heritage, old country roots beneath American polish. I reached for the top-shelf bourbon, our best being relative in a place like El Refugio, and poured 2 fingers into a clean glass. As I set it before him, our eyes met briefly, and something flickered in his dark gaze. Recognition, perhaps, or curiosity. I looked away quickly, unsettled by the intensity I'd glimpsed there. He didn't drink immediately, just held the glass, studying the amber liquid with apparent fascination. His hands were clean, manicured, but I noticed the slight calluses on his knuckles, the faint scar along his left thumb. These were hands that knew work, despite the expensive suit and gold watch that caught the light with each subtle movement. The two men who'd entered with him took positions at opposite ends of the bar, their placement strategic, covering angles. I'd seen enough of Caleb's paranoid surveillance techniques to recognize professional security when I saw it. The thought of Caleb sent an involuntary shudder through me. I pushed it down, forced my breathing to remain steady, my hands to keep moving through their familiar tasks. 8 months of safety. 8 months of building a new life from nothing. 8 months of looking over my shoulder but never seeing the monster I'd left behind. 8 months of almost believing I might actually be free. "Slow night," the suited man observed, his gaze sweeping the nearly empty bar before returning to me. It wasn't quite a question, but it felt like he expected a response. "Tuesday usually is," I replied, wiping down the already clean bar surface, needing something to do with my hands. "Picks up on weekends." He nodded slowly, as if filing away this mundane information for some unknowable purpose. "You've worked here long?" The question should have been innocent. Small talk to fill the silence. But my instincts prickled with warning. I'd learned to be careful with personal information, to keep my history vague, my present temporary. "Long enough," I said, offering nothing. A slight smile curved his lips, appreciation for my evasion evident in his expression. "Fair enough." He finally took a sip of the whiskey, and I watched his face for the inevitable disappointment. El Refugio's top shelf wasn't exactly premium, but he showed no reaction, just set the glass down with careful precision. The bar's front door opened again, and I turned automatically, that constant vigilance pulling my attention toward every new arrival, every potential threat. And then the world stopped. Caleb stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his jacket, his eyes scanning the bar with the focused intensity of a predator tracking prey. He looked different than I remembered, thinner maybe, with a manic edge to his movements that set every nerve in my body screaming with recognition and terror. The glass I'd been holding slipped from my numb fingers, shattering against the floor in an explosion of sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence that had descended over my awareness. Everything else faded to background noise, the television, the rain, the murmured conversations. All I could hear was my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. All I could see was Caleb's face, as his gaze swept the room, searching, hunting, searching for me. I dropped below the bar line, my body moving on instinct, muscle memory from months of imagining this exact moment. My hands shook as I crouched among the beer cases and supplies, trying to control my breathing, trying to think through the panic that threatened to overwhelm rational thought. He'd found me. After 8 months of running, of hiding, of building a life in the shadows, Caleb had finally tracked me down. "Reina," Marco's concerned voice filtered through my terror. "What's wrong? What happened?" I couldn't answer. Couldn't form words around the fear that had locked my throat closed. Through the gap between bar and counter, I could see Caleb's boots as he moved deeper into the space, his steps deliberate, purposeful. "I'm looking for someone." Caleb's voice cut through the bar's ambient noise, and the familiar sound of it sent ice through my veins. "Latina woman, mid-20s, goes by Reina. Pretty. Long dark hair. Works here, I think." The description was accurate enough to be damning. My hands pressed against my mouth, muffling the sound of my ragged breathing. "We don't give out information about our staff," Marco said, his voice firm despite the slight tremor I could detect beneath his words. Marco was protective, but he was also 63 and had a bad knee. He couldn't stop Caleb if things turned violent. "I'm not asking for information," Caleb said. And I could hear the false reasonableness in his tone, the careful modulation that preceded his worst rages. "I'm asking to see my girlfriend. We had a misunderstanding and I just want to talk to her, make things right." Lies. All lies wrapped in reasonable words and manufactured concern. I risked a glance through the gap, and my eyes locked with the suited man's. He was still seated, still holding his whiskey, but his posture had changed subtly. Alert. Assessing. His dark eyes held mine for a long moment, and something passed between us. Some wordless communication I couldn't quite define. Then he moved. The suited man rose from his bar stool with fluid grace, setting his whiskey down with deliberate precision. His movement drew immediate attention. Caleb's head snapped toward him. The two security men shifted position, and even Marco went still behind the pass-through window. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the small space despite its low volume. "You're disrupting my evening." Caleb's eyes narrowed, taking in the expensive suit, the confident stance, the implied threat beneath polite words. "This doesn't concern you, friend." "I'm not your friend." The correction was mild, almost pleasant, but something in the delivery made the temperature in the room drop several degrees. And when someone enters an establishment making demands and frightening the staff, it becomes everyone's concern. From my position behind the bar, I watched this exchange with a mixture of terror and confusion. Who was this man? Why was he intervening? The protective instinct was touching, but potentially suicidal. Caleb might look thin and unimpressive, but I knew the violence he was capable of, the weapons he carried, the complete lack of conscience that governed his actions. "I'm just looking for my girlfriend," Caleb said, his tone shifting toward aggressive defensiveness. "She's confused, had some kind of breakdown. I'm worried about her safety." The lies rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. This was the narrative he'd probably been perfecting for months. The concerned boyfriend, the unstable girlfriend, the tragic misunderstanding that justified his hunt. "Interesting," the suited man said, taking a step closer to Caleb. "Because from where I'm standing, you look like a man who drives away the things he's supposed to protect." Caleb's face flushed with anger. "You don't know anything about our relationship. I know enough." Another step forward, closing the distance between them with controlled precision. "I know that a woman who hears your voice drops glassware and hides behind a bar. I know that kind of fear isn't born from misunderstandings." My breathing had stopped entirely. He'd seen me, had understood in seconds what had taken me years to fully comprehend. That my relationship with Caleb wasn't love gone wrong, but systematic terror dressed up in the language of devotion. "Listen, whoever you are," Caleb began, his hand moving toward his jacket pocket where I knew he kept a knife. "Enzo Bianchi." The name was offered with casual authority, and I watched Caleb's face pale instantly. Even I recognized that name, whispered in the neighborhood like a warning, spoken with the kind of respect reserved for dangerous things. Enzo Bianchi, head of the Italian syndicate that controlled this part of the city with an iron fist wrapped in silk gloves. And he was standing in El Refugio, defending me. "Mr. Bianchi," Caleb said, his bravado crumbling into something closer to panic. "I didn't realize. I'm just here for my girlfriend. This is personal business, nothing to do with your operations. Everything that happens in this neighborhood is my business," Enzo replied, his tone conversational but his eyes cold as winter stone. "And right now, my business is finishing my drink in peace. Your presence is preventing that." The two security men had positioned themselves on either side of Caleb, not touching him, not even particularly close, but their presence was unmistakable. Caleb was surrounded, outmaneuvered, and judging by the sweat beading on his forehead, finally understanding the depth of his miscalculation. "I'll go," Caleb said quickly. "Just let me talk to Reina first. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." "You're asking for nothing," Enzo said softly, and the gentleness of his voice somehow made the words more threatening. "You're leaving, now, and you won't return to this establishment, or any establishment where Miss Alvarez might be employed. Is that clear?" The use of my last name sent a shock through me. How did he know it? I'd been so careful, had used only Reyna for everything in the neighborhood, had avoided any official documentation that might create a trail for Caleb to follow. Caleb's hands clenched into fists, his jaw working as he struggled between rage and self-preservation. I knew that look, had seen it countless times before he exploded into violence. But this time, something was different. This time, there was genuine fear beneath the anger. You can't keep me from seeing her. Caleb tried one last time, but the conviction had drained from his voice. We have history. She's mine. She's no one's, Enzo replied, and something in his tone suggested the conversation was over. Least of all yours. One of the security men, a broad-shouldered figure with dead eyes and scarred knuckles, moved closer to Caleb. Not touching, just being present, his body language conveying volumes about what would happen if Caleb chose to be difficult. Fine, Caleb spat, backing toward the door. But this isn't over, Reyna, he called toward the bar, his voice carrying the promise of future violence. You can't hide forever. He can't protect you all the time. Actually, Enzo said mildly, I can. Leave now, before my patience expires entirely. Caleb left, the door slamming behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. The tension in the bar didn't immediately dissipate. Everyone seemed frozen, processing what had just occurred. I remained crouched behind the bar, my body shaking with adrenaline and shock, unable to process the rapid sequence of events that had just unfolded. Footsteps approached, and I tensed, ready to bolt despite having nowhere to go. Miss Alvarez. Enzo's voice came from just above me, calm and measured. You can come out now. He's gone. Slowly, I rose from my hiding place, my legs unsteady, my hands gripping the bar edge for support. Enzo had returned to his seat, his whiskey in hand as if nothing unusual had just occurred. His security men had resumed their positions, though I noticed they were both watching the entrance with increased vigilance. Thank you, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. You didn't have to do that. Actually, Enzo said, taking a sip of his drink. I did. You saved my life once. I'm simply returning the favor. I stared at him, confused. I've never met you before tonight. You haven't met me, he agreed. But 6 months ago, in this very bar, you prevented something catastrophic without even realizing it. My mind raced backward, trying to place him in my memories. 6 months ago would have been shortly after I'd arrived at El Refugio, still raw from my escape, still jumping at every shadow. I don't understand, I said. Marco had emerged from the kitchen, his face pale but his expression curious. Boss Bianchi is talking about the night with the kitchen fire, he said quietly. Remember? You noticed the gas leak before anyone else did. The memory surfaced slowly. A slow Tuesday night, much like this one. I'd been restocking supplies in the back when I'd caught the faint odor of gas, that distinctive rotten egg smell that set off every alarm bell my grandmother had instilled in me about kitchen safety. I'd traced it to a loose connection on the stove, had turned off the main line, and called Marco to get it fixed. There was a man sitting at the bar that night, I said slowly, pieces connecting. Alone, in the corner, drinking whiskey. Enzo inclined his head slightly. If you hadn't smelled that leak, if the kitchen had ignited with that much gas built up, the explosion would have killed everyone in this building, including me. The weight of that revelation settled over me like a physical thing. I'd saved his life without knowing it, and now he'd saved mine in return. But the debt felt impossibly unbalanced. I'd prevented an accident. He'd confronted my abuser, had used his considerable power and reputation to send Caleb running. He'll come back, I said, voicing my greatest fear. Maybe not tonight, but eventually. He always does. Not this time. Enzo said with quiet certainty. By morning, he'll understand the consequences of returning. I'll make sure of it. I wanted to believe him, wanted to accept the safety he was offering with such calm assurance. But 8 months of running had taught me that safety was temporary, that peace was an illusion quickly shattered. Why? I asked. You don't know me. Don't owe me anything beyond what you just did. I owe you your life, Enzo corrected, and I always pay my debts. The bar gradually emptied as word of the confrontation spread through the neighborhood with the speed of wildfire. By 10 o'clock, only Enzo and his 2 security men remained, along with Marco, who pretended to organize receipts, while clearly eavesdropping on every word. I continued my closing duties with mechanical precision, my hands performing familiar tasks while my mind struggled to process the evening's events. Enzo hadn't left, had simply continued sipping his whiskey and watching me work with that same intense assessment I'd noticed when he first entered. Tell me about him, Enzo said finally, breaking the silence that had settled over the bar. The man who just left. I didn't pretend to misunderstand. Caleb Reeves. We were together for 3 years. He's very good at making people believe he's normal. But he's not. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. No, he's not. I poured myself a glass of water with shaking hands, the adrenaline crash finally hitting my system in full force. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind, her stern but loving warnings about men who claimed to love with their fists, who confused possession with devotion. Mi niña, she used to say in Spanish, her weathered hands holding mine. Love should feel like sunshine, not a cage. I'd ignored her wisdom, had been young and stupid, and convinced that Caleb's intensity was passion, that his jealousy was proof of love, that his control was protection. By the time I'd understood the truth, I was already so deep in his web that escape seemed impossible. He started small, I found myself saying, the words emerging without conscious decision. Criticizing my clothes, my friends, my job, making suggestions about how I could be better. I thought he was trying to help me improve myself. Enzo listened without interruption, his dark eyes never leaving my face. Then came the isolation, I continued, my voice distant as I traveled back through memories I'd worked hard to bury. Somehow my friends were always causing drama. My family was too demanding. My coworkers were inappropriate. One by one, he cut away everyone who might have helped me see what was happening. Marco had stopped even pretending to work, his face reflecting the horror of understanding what I'd been living through. The first time he hit me was on my 23rd birthday, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I'd worn a red dress to dinner. He said I was dressing like a whore, trying to attract other men's attention. When I tried to explain that I'd worn it for him, that it was his favorite color, he backhanded me hard enough to split my lip. Enzo's expression remained neutral, but his knuckles whitened around his glass. Afterward, he cried. I continued, that bitter laugh escaping before I could stop it. Swore he'd never do it again, that I'd just pushed him too far, that if I could be more understanding of his stress, more careful about not triggering his temper, everything would be fine. And you believed him, Enzo said quietly. I wanted to believe him, I corrected. There's a difference. I wanted to believe that the man I'd fallen in love with was still in there, that this was an aberration, that love meant fighting through the hard times. The next 2 years had been a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Caleb had been careful, had known exactly how far to push before pulling back with apologies and gifts and promises. He'd isolated me so completely that by the time I recognized the pattern, I had no one left to turn to, no resources of my own, nowhere to run that he couldn't find me. What changed? Enzo asked. What made you finally leave? I took a long drink of water, remembering that final night, the catalyst that had finally broken through my paralysis and fear. He started talking about having children, I said. About how a baby would cement our relationship, prove my commitment to him. And I realized that if I brought a child into that situation, I'd be condemning an innocent life to the same hell I was living. That finally scared me more than he did. The escape had been desperate, poorly planned, fueled by terror and opportunity. I'd waited until Caleb left for a business trip, had grabbed what little cash I'd managed to hide, and had run. No plan beyond putting distance between us. No destination beyond a way. I ended up here by accident, I said. Literally got off a bus at random, walked until I couldn't walk anymore, and stumbled into El Refugio, looking for a bathroom and maybe a glass of water. Marco offered me a job, cash under the table, no questions. I've been here ever since. 8 months, Enzo observed. That's how long you've been running. I nodded. I thought I'd been so careful. Changed my appearance, used only cash, avoided social media, never stayed in one place long enough to leave a trail. Yet he found you anyway, Enzo finished. How? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe someone recognized me. Maybe he's been systematically searching every dive bar in the city. Maybe he has resources I don't know about. Enzo set down his empty glass with careful precision. He has connections to some unsavory people. Low-level dealers, petty criminals, the kind of network that deals in information and violence. He's been putting out word about you for months, offering a reward for information on your whereabouts. The revelation sent ice through my veins. How do you know that? Because I make it my business to know everything that happens in my territory, Enzo replied simply. When your name started appearing in certain circles, I had my people gather information. I just didn't connect you to the woman who'd saved my life until tonight. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with precise movements. You can't stay at your current residence. By now, Caleb has likely traced your route backward, knows where you're living. My men will escort you home to gather essentials, and then you'll relocate somewhere safe. I can't afford, I began. You misunderstand, Enzo interrupted gently. This isn't a request, and there's no cost. You saved my life. The least I can do is ensure yours remains protected. For how long? I asked, fear and exhaustion making my voice sharp. A week? A month? Eventually you'll move on to whatever mob bosses do, and I'll be right back where I started. Until the threat is permanently resolved, Enzo said, his tone carrying absolute certainty. The implication was clear, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. You're going to kill him. I'm going to ensure he no longer presents a danger to you, Enzo corrected. The method will depend on his choices going forward. I should have been horrified by the casual way he discussed ending a life. Instead, I felt a complicated mix of relief, guilt, and something darker I didn't want to examine too closely. I don't want his blood on my conscience, I said. Then it's fortunate, Enzo replied, that it will be on mine, not yours. The apartment Enzo's men moved me to was in a secure building downtown, the kind of place with keycard access, doormen, and security cameras covering every angle. My new home was on the 15th floor, a furnished 2-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered spectacular views of the city. It was also a cage, however gilded. The building has 24-hour security, explained Antonio, one of Enzo's men who'd accompanied me. Mr. Bianchi owns the entire structure. No one gets in or out without us knowing. I stood in the middle of the spacious living room, my meager belongings in a single duffel bag, feeling dislocated and overwhelmed. 72 hours ago, I'd been living in a studio apartment with water-stained ceilings and neighbors who screamed at each other through paper-thin walls. Now I was surrounded by luxury I'd never dreamed of affording, and it felt wrong, like wearing someone else's skin. There are clothes in the closet, Antonio continued, gesturing toward the bedroom. Mr. Bianchi had someone shop for essentials. If anything doesn't fit or isn't to your taste, Let me know and we'll arrange alternatives. I found my voice. I can't accept all this. It's too much. Antonio's expression remained professionally neutral. Mr. Bianchi pays his debts. You saved his life. This is a small fraction of what that's worth to him. After he left, I explored my new prison with cautious steps. The refrigerator was fully stocked with groceries, the cabinets filled with dishes and cooking supplies. The bathroom contained toiletries still in their packaging, expensive brands I recognized from commercials but had never purchased. In the bedroom closet, I found a wardrobe that actually fit me, casual clothes in my size and style preferences. Someone had paid very close attention to details, had observed enough about me to make educated guesses about what I'd need and want. The thoughtfulness of it all made my eyes burn with unexpected tears. I collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion finally claiming me in full force. The mattress was obscenely comfortable, the sheets soft against my skin. And within minutes I was asleep despite the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. I woke to darkness and the sound of my own screaming. The nightmare had been visceral and brutal. Caleb finding me, dragging me back, punishing me for the audacity of escape. I sat up gasping, my heart racing, my skin slick with sweat. Miss Alvarez? A knock at the door, concerned and urgent. Are you all right? I stumbled to the door, opening it to find Antonio standing in the hallway, his hand resting on the weapon I could see outlined beneath his jacket. I'm fine, I managed. Just a bad dream. He studied me with professional assessment, clearly evaluating whether I was telling the truth. Would you like me to call someone? A doctor? Mr. Bianchi? No, I said quickly. I just need some water. He nodded but didn't leave, clearly uncertain about leaving me alone. Mr. Bianchi asked me to inform you that he'll be stopping by tomorrow afternoon to check on your situation. If you need anything before then, use the phone in the living room. The first speed dial reaches me directly. After he left, I couldn't bring myself to return to the bedroom. Instead, I curled up on the living room couch, watching the city lights through the windows, trying to convince my nervous system that I was safe, that Caleb couldn't reach me here, that for the first time in 3 years I could actually breathe without fear. I didn't believe it. Enzo arrived the next afternoon with the same precise timing as everything else about him. He wore a different suit, dark blue this time, but carried himself with the same quiet authority I'd observed at El Refugio. How are you settling in? He asked, accepting my offer of coffee with a slight nod. It's overwhelming, I admitted. Beautiful, generous, and completely overwhelming. But safe, Enzo added. That's what matters. I handed him a mug, our fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Even that casual contact sent awareness through me that I immediately tried to suppress. This man was a criminal, a mob boss, someone who solved problems with violence and intimidation. The fact that he was also my savior didn't change the fundamental reality of what he was. I've been making arrangements, Enzo continued, settling into one of the armchairs with casual grace. Caleb Reeves is being strongly encouraged to leave the city. His connections here are being severed, his resources frozen, his options limited. Encouraged how? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Conversations about consequences, Enzo replied vaguely. He's being made to understand that returning to this area, attempting to contact you in any way, would be extremely detrimental to his continued health and freedom. I sipped my coffee, processing this information. You're scaring him into running. I'm helping him make the intelligent choice, Enzo corrected. What he does with that help is up to him. We sat in silence for a moment, the unspoken complications of our situation hanging between us like morning fog. I looked into your history, Enzo said finally. Your grandmother, Elena Alvarez, raised you after your parents died in an accident. She taught you cooking, Spanish, traditional remedies. She died 2 years ago, leaving you alone and vulnerable. Caleb filled that void. The invasion of privacy should have angered me, but I recognized it for what it was: protection through information. Enzo needed to understand who he was defending and why. She would have hated him, I said softly, would have seen through him immediately. I think that's why he isolated me from her before she passed. He knew she was the one person whose opinion I valued more than his. She taught you to be strong, Enzo observed. That strength is what allowed you to finally leave. She taught me to survive, I corrected. There's a difference. Enzo studied me with those dark, assessing eyes. Survival is the foundation of strength. Everything else builds from there. He stayed for another hour, asking questions about my plans, my needs, my concerns. By the time he left, I felt simultaneously more secure and more uncertain about my future. The days settled into an unexpected routine. I remained in the apartment, not quite prisoner, but not quite free either. Antonio or one of the other security men checked on me regularly, bringing groceries or supplies, ensuring I had everything I needed. Enzo visited every few days, ostensibly to update me on the situation with Caleb, but our conversations gradually expanded beyond the immediate crisis. We talked about books, food, music, the small details of life that had nothing to do with danger or debt. I learned that Enzo had inherited his position from his father, that he'd spent years modernizing and legitimizing portions of the family business, that he collected rare books and had a weakness for old Hollywood films. He learned that I'd once dreamed of becoming a chef, that I still cooked my grandmother's recipes when I needed comfort, that I was terrified of thunderstorms and addicted to terrible reality television. The casual intimacy of these exchanges felt dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with Caleb. I have news, Enzo said during one of his visits, 3 weeks after I'd moved into the apartment. Caleb has left the state. My sources confirm he's relocated to California and is making efforts to establish himself there. Relief washed through me, so intense it made me dizzy. He's really gone? For now, Enzo cautioned, but we'll continue monitoring the situation. If he makes any move to return, I'll know immediately. I sank onto the couch, feeling like I could finally breathe fully for the first time in years. Thank you. I don't know how to properly thank you for everything you've done. You already thanked me, Enzo replied. By saving my life months before I could save yours. That was an accident, I protested. I just smelled gas. You systematically dismantled my abuser's entire support structure. Debt is debt, Enzo said simply, though I'm beginning to think this stopped being about obligation weeks ago. The admission hung in the air between us, loaded with implications neither of us seemed ready to fully examine. What happens now? I asked. Do I return to my old life? Find a new bar to work in? You could, Enzo said carefully. Or you could consider alternatives. I waited, sensing he had more to say. I own several legitimate businesses, he continued. Restaurants, primarily. High-end establishments that could use someone with your skills and discretion. The pay would be significantly better than El Refugio, and the security measures would ensure your safety. Working for you, I said, trying to parse the complicated emotions that suggestion triggered. Working with me, he corrected. There's a difference. Is there? I challenged, because from where I'm sitting, this feels like exchanging one form of control for another. Enzo's expression flickered with something that might have been hurt, though it vanished so quickly I couldn't be sure. If that's how you see it, then I've failed to communicate my intentions. What are your intentions? I asked boldly, my newfound safety giving me courage I'd been lacking for years. He stood, moving to the window, his back to me as he looked out over the city. Honestly, I'm not entirely certain. I know that I've come to value these visits, these conversations. I know that your well-being matters to me beyond the scope of repaying a debt. And I know that returning you to a life of poverty and vulnerability after you've been here feels unconscionable. I joined him at the window, standing close enough that I could smell his cologne, that subtle spice I'd come to associate with safety. "I'm afraid," I admitted quietly. "Not of you, exactly, but of what you represent. Of becoming dependent on someone again. Of trading one cage for another, even if this one has better furniture." "Fear is rational," Enzo replied. "You've been hurt, manipulated, controlled. Trusting again would be foolish if it weren't carefully considered." He turned to face me, and the intensity in his dark eyes made my breath catch. "I'm not asking for your trust immediately," he continued. "I'm asking for the opportunity to earn it. To prove that protection doesn't have to equal possession, that caring doesn't require control." "And if I say no?" I asked. "If I decide to leave? Find my own way?" "Then I'll ensure you have the resources to do so safely," Enzo said without hesitation. "A new identity if needed, money to start over, security monitoring from a distance. Your freedom isn't conditional, Reina." The use of my name instead of a formal address sent warmth through me. This was what my grandmother had meant about sunshine versus cages. This felt like doors opening rather than closing. "I need time," I said, "to figure out who I am without fear, what I want when I'm not just surviving." "Take all the time you need," Enzo replied. "I'll be here when you're ready to decide." He moved to leave, and I caught his hand without thinking. The contact electric, and startling to both of us. "Thank you," I said again, meaning it more deeply than I had before. "For seeing me when I was invisible, for standing between me and danger, for giving me space to breathe." Enzo's fingers tightened around mine briefly before he released me. "You were never invisible, Reina. Some of us just needed the right moment to truly see you." 6 weeks after that conversation, I accepted Enzo's offer to work at Bellanotte, his flagship restaurant in the heart of downtown. The position was officially listed as culinary consultant, but in practice I helped design menus, trained kitchen staff, and occasionally prepared special dishes for VIP guests who appreciated authentic Latin cuisine. The work was challenging, engaging, exactly what I needed to remember who I'd been before Caleb had systematically erased my identity. Enzo maintained respectful distance, appearing at the restaurant occasionally for business dinners, but never pressuring me for more personal interaction. When we did speak, our conversations remained friendly, but professional, as if we'd mutually agreed to ignore the complicated tension that simmered beneath every exchange. I was beginning to believe that maybe, possibly, I could build something stable from the wreckage of my past. And then Caleb came back. The first sign was subtle. Flowers delivered to the restaurant with no card, the arrangement oddly familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. Then came the phone calls to the restaurant's main line, hang-ups whenever someone answered, but I could feel him on the other end of the silence. Antonio increased security immediately, appearing at my apartment building more frequently, escorting me to and from work with heightened vigilance. "He's testing boundaries," Antonio explained grimly, "seeing what he can get away with before we respond." The night Caleb tried to grab me outside the restaurant, Antonio and his partner intervened within seconds, pulling me to safety while backup materialized from seemingly nowhere. Caleb was subdued quickly, professionally, without the excessive violence I'd feared. Enzo arrived minutes later, his usual composure cracked just enough to reveal fury beneath. "Take her home," he ordered Antonio. "I'll handle this." "No," I said, surprising everyone, including myself. "I need to be here, need to face him." Enzo studied me for a long moment before nodding once. "Then you'll face him on your terms, not his." Caleb was restrained but conscious, his face already showing bruises from his brief struggle with security. When he saw me, his expression transformed into that familiar mask of wounded devotion. "Reina, baby, please," he pleaded. "I just want to talk. I've been getting help, been working on myself. I know I messed up before, but I'm different now." The words were hollow, performative, the same script he'd used countless times before. "You're not different," I said, my voice steady despite the fear still coursing through my system. "You're just better at pretending." "How can you say that?" Caleb's voice broke convincingly. "After everything we had together, everything I did for you?" "You isolated me," I countered, each word a reclamation of truth he'd worked so hard to obscure. "Controlled me, hit me, terrorized me for 3 years until I was so broken I couldn't remember who I'd been before you." "That's not how it was," Caleb protested. "You're remembering it wrong, letting him—" He jerked his head toward Enzo. "Poison your mind against me." "He didn't need to," I said. "You did that yourself every time you raised your hand, every time you made me apologize for your violence, every time you convinced me that love was supposed to hurt." For the first time, Caleb's mask slipped, revealing genuine anger beneath the performance. "You think you're better than me now? That you've upgraded?" He laughed bitterly. "You're just a whore who latched onto a richer monster. At least I loved you." "That wasn't love," I said, and finally believed it completely. "Love doesn't live in fear, doesn't hide in shame, doesn't measure worth in submission." I turned to Enzo, who'd been watching this exchange with that same intense assessment I'd come to recognize. "I'm ready to go home now." Caleb shouted after us as we left, threats and pleas mixing into desperate noise that no longer had the power to touch me. Antonio and the security team would handle the practical matters: police reports, restraining orders, ensuring Caleb understood that returning again would have consequences he wouldn't survive. In the car, Enzo sat beside me, close, but not touching, his presence a solid anchor in my storm of emotions. "You were remarkable," he said quietly. Facing him like that took extraordinary courage. "I'm tired of being afraid," I admitted. "Tired of letting him define my life even when he's not in it." "He won't trouble you again," Enzo assured me. "I'll make certain of it." We rode in silence for several minutes before I spoke again. "You asked me once if I was ready to decide about us, about what this is." Enzo turned to face me, his dark eyes searching mine. "And?" "I'm not completely ready," I admitted. "I'm still healing, still learning to trust my own judgment again. But I'd like the chance to figure it out, to see where this goes without fear forcing my choices." A slow smile transformed his face, warming those cold eyes with something genuine. "I can work with that." At my apartment, Enzo walked me to the door, our hands brushing in a contact that felt charged with possibility. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm still figuring this out too. What it means to care for someone without controlling them, to protect without possessing." "We'll figure it out together," I replied, the promise feeling less terrifying than it once might have. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to my forehead that felt reverent, a benediction rather than a demand. "Together," he agreed. 3 months later, I was working late at Bella Note when Enzo appeared with a bottle of aged tequila and 2 glasses. "I thought we should celebrate," he said, pouring generous measures. "Celebrate what?" "Your official partnership in the restaurant," he replied. "Papers were finalized today. You're now part owner of Bella Notte." I stared at him, shocked. "Enzo, I can't accept." "You can and you will," he interrupted gently. "You've transformed this place, made it better than I imagined possible. This isn't charity. It's recognition of your contribution." We toasted, the tequila smooth and perfect, and in that moment, surrounded by the restaurant I'd helped build, with a man who'd proven his protection didn't require my submission, I felt something I'd been denied for so long: hope. The road ahead wouldn't be simple. Enzo's world carried dangers I was still learning to navigate, and my healing was ongoing, not instant. But I was no longer the terrified woman hiding behind a bar, and he was no longer just the mob boss who'd intervened. We were two damaged people learning to build something new from our respective ruins, and that felt like exactly the right place to begin. Outside the restaurant windows, rain had started again, but this time I wasn't afraid of storms. The months that followed Caleb's final attempt became a study in gradual transformation. I moved through my days at Bella Notte with increasing confidence, my hands remembering the joy of creation that cooking had once brought me, before fear had stolen everything beautiful from my life. Enzo kept his promise about distance and patience, but distance didn't mean absence. He appeared at the restaurant several times a week, sometimes for legitimate business meetings with associates whose expensive suits and careful manners couldn't quite disguise the violence they were capable of. Other times, simply to sit at the bar and watch me work with those dark, assessing eyes that had learned to soften when they landed on me. "You're staring again," I said one evening, not looking up from the mole sauce I was carefully adjusting, adding another pinch of cinnamon the way my grandmother had taught me, trusting my senses over any written recipe. "I'm observing," Enzo corrected, amusement threading through his voice. "There's a difference." "Observing implies scientific detachment," I countered, finally meeting his gaze across the pass-through window that connected kitchen to dining room. "You look like you're cataloging details for later." "Perhaps I am," he admitted without embarrassment. "You're beautiful when you're in your element, confident, completely present. It's captivating." The compliment sent warmth through me that had nothing to do with the heat radiating from the kitchen stoves. 3 months ago, such words would have triggered panic, would have felt like the beginning of possession disguised as admiration. Now, filtered through everything I'd learned about Enzo's particular brand of protection, they felt like simple truth offered without expectation. "Flattery will get you extra portions," I said, ladling the complex sauce over braised short ribs that had been cooking low and slow for hours. The meat so tender it fell apart at the gentlest pressure. "I'm counting on it," Enzo replied, that rare, genuine smile transforming his usually severe features into something approachable, almost boyish. Antonio appeared in the doorway, his expression apologetic but urgent. "Boss, we have a situation." The warmth evaporated from Enzo's face instantly, replaced by the cold calculation I'd witnessed that first night at El Refugio. "What kind of situation?" "The kind that needs your immediate attention," Antonio said carefully, his eyes flickering briefly to me before returning to Enzo. "Private discussion required." Enzo stood, buttoning his suit jacket with precise movements. "I'll be back," he said to me, the promise carrying weight beyond simple reassurance. "Don't leave without Antonio or Marco accompanying you." Fear's familiar fingers touched my spine. "Is it Caleb?" "No," Enzo assured me quickly. "Different matter entirely. You're safe, but I need you to trust the security protocols until I return." After they left, the kitchen suddenly felt too large, too quiet despite the presence of my sous chef and line cooks working efficiently through their tasks. I forced myself to focus on the work, to find calm in the familiar rhythm of prep and execution, but my mind kept circling back to that brief moment of concern I'd seen in Antonio's carefully neutral expression. The evening service passed without incident, each course flowing smoothly from kitchen to table, my dishes receiving the kind of appreciative response that had become gratifyingly common since I'd taken ownership stake in Bella Notte. But Enzo didn't return, and his absence created a hollow space in the restaurant's atmosphere that I felt with surprising intensity. It was nearly midnight when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart stuttered before I recognized Enzo's formal phrasing. "Situation resolved. I'll explain tomorrow. Rest well, Reina." I didn't rest well. Sleep came in fragmented pieces, interrupted by formless anxiety that had nothing to do with Caleb and everything to do with the realization that Enzo had become essential to my sense of safety in ways that terrified me almost as much as my ex-boyfriend once had. The difference was that Enzo's presence felt like freedom expanding rather than contracting. But that difference didn't make the dependency any less frightening. He appeared at my apartment the following afternoon, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him, his usual immaculate appearance slightly rumpled, shadows beneath his dark eyes suggesting sleep had eluded him as thoroughly as it had evaded me. "Coffee?" I offered, already moving toward the kitchen. "Please," he said gratefully, sinking onto the couch with uncharacteristic weariness. I prepared it the way I'd learned he preferred. Strong, black, no sugar, served in a proper cup rather than a mug. When I handed it to him, our fingers brushed in that now familiar contact that always carried more weight than such casual touch should reasonably hold. "Tell me about the situation," I said, settling into the chair across from him rather than beside him, maintaining space that felt necessary for this conversation. Enzo took a long drink of coffee before answering. "One of my lieutenants made a catastrophically poor decision that put several of my operations at risk. The kind of decision that requires immediate and decisive response." "Decisive meaning violent," I translated quietly. "Decisive meaning permanent," Enzo corrected, his eyes meeting mine without flinching from the truth of what he was. "I don't apologize for that. The man betrayed not just me, but everyone who depends on my protection. His actions endangered families, children, people who trusted that my word meant something. I absorbed this, trying to reconcile the man who spoke so casually about ending a life with the man who had visited my grandmother's grave without being asked, who had left flowers on her headstone with a note in careful Spanish, thanking her for raising someone strong enough to save his life. Does it ever bother you?" I asked. "The violence? The decisions you have to make?" Enzo was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant as he contemplated my question with apparent seriousness. "Yes," he said finally. "Every death stays with me. I don't forget names or faces. Don't allow myself the luxury of emotional distance from consequences. The moment I stop feeling the weight of these decisions is the moment I become the monster people assume I already am." "But you do it anyway," I observed. "Because the alternative is chaos," Enzo replied. "Power abhors vacuum. If I don't maintain order, someone worse will fill the space I leave behind. Someone who won't care about protecting families, who won't have codes or limits, who will burn everything for profit without conscience." It was the most he'd ever revealed about his philosophy, his internal justifications for the life he led. I should have been horrified. Instead, I found myself understanding, even if I couldn't quite condone. "I'm not asking you to approve," Enzo continued as if reading my thoughts. "I'm asking you to understand who I am completely before you decide what we're building here." "And what are we building?" I asked, finally voicing the question that had been growing between us for months. Enzo set down his coffee cup with careful precision, his dark eyes holding mine with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "That depends on you. What I want is clear. I want you in my life, in whatever capacity you're willing to accept. As business partner, as friend, as something more complicated and intimate that we're both dancing around acknowledging." My heart hammered against my ribs. "You're talking about a relationship." "I'm talking about whatever you're ready for," Enzo corrected. "I meant what I said about earning your trust, about proving protection doesn't require possession. If friendship is all you can offer, I'll accept that. If you need more time to heal before considering anything romantic, I'll wait. But I won't pretend I don't want more. Won't hide that every day I spend with you makes the wanting more acute." The honesty was devastating in its simplicity. No manipulation, no pressure, just raw truth laid bare between us. "I'm afraid," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not of you hurting me physically. You've proven you won't do that. But of losing myself again, of becoming so dependent on someone that I forget how to exist independently." "Then we build something different," Enzo said, leaning forward with earnest intensity. "Something where your independence isn't just preserved, but celebrated. where my protection is a foundation you stand on, rather than a cage that contains you. Is that even possible? I asked. In your world, with what you are. I don't know, Enzo admitted. But I'd like the chance to find out. With you. The invitation hung in the air between us, weighted with possibility and risk in equal measure. I thought about my grandmother, about her wisdom regarding sunshine and cages, about her fierce independence even in the face of poverty and hardship. She would have been terrified of Enzo's world, but I thought she might have respected his honesty, his willingness to be vulnerable, his recognition that love without freedom wasn't love at all. I need you to promise me something, I said finally. Anything. Promise that if I say no to something, any boundary I establish, you'll respect it without resentment or manipulation. That no will always be a complete sentence with you. I promise, Enzo said without hesitation. Your no will always be absolute. And Reina, you should know that extends both directions. If I ever cross a line you're not comfortable with, if my world becomes too dark or dangerous for you to navigate, you can walk away. I'll ensure you're safe, ensure you have resources, but I won't hold you through guilt or obligation. The reassurance should have brought relief. Instead, it highlighted how deeply entangled my heart had already become with this complicated, dangerous, unexpectedly tender man. Okay, I said, the word both surrender and beginning. Let's try building something different. Enzo's smile was incandescent, transforming his entire face with joy so pure it made my chest ache. He stood, crossing the space between us with measured steps, then extended his hand with old-fashioned formality. May I? He asked, the question encompassing so much more than the simple touch being offered. I placed my hand in his, feeling the warmth and strength of his fingers closing around mine with exquisite gentleness. He drew me to my feet, maintaining that single point of contact as if it were precious, fragile, something requiring careful handling. Thank you, he murmured, for taking this chance. I won't waste it. You better not, I replied, trying for lightness despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. I'm trusting you with things I swore I'd never trust anyone with again. I know, Enzo said seriously, and I don't take that lightly. He left shortly after, needing to return to whatever legitimate business crisis required his attention, but the apartment felt different in his absence. Less lonely somehow, as if his presence had altered the fundamental atmosphere in ways that persisted even when he wasn't physically present. That night, I cooked my grandmother's recipe for pozole, the complex traditional soup that required hours of patient attention and precise balancing of flavors. As I worked, I talked to her the way I had when she was alive, updating her on my life, my choices, my complicated feelings about the man who had saved me and was now asking for permission to love me. I think you'd understand, I told her memory, stirring the rich broth fragrant with dried chilies and hominy. He's dangerous, yes, but he's honest about it. And he sees me, Abuela, really sees me, not the version of me he wants to create. The soup simmered through the night, filling the apartment with aromas that smelled like home, like safety, like the fusion of past and present I was learning to navigate. The next morning, I packaged some of the pozole in a container and brought it to Bella Notte, leaving it in the office refrigerator with a note for Enzo. For when you need reminding that some things are worth the patience they require. His response came hours later, a single text. Best thing I've ever tasted. The soup was excellent too. Despite everything, despite the fear and uncertainty and complicated navigation of trust and vulnerability, I found myself laughing, the sound echoing through the empty kitchen with genuine joy. Maybe, I thought, this was what healing looked like. Not the absence of scars, but the gradual rediscovery of laughter despite them. And maybe, just maybe, Enzo Bianchi was exactly the right kind of dangerous to help me remember how to live fearlessly.